This is the second one of the week, and today we're going to be discussing a very difficult, emotional, deep issue, the topic of suicide, and knowing that this is just such a key, important issue as maybe you personally have struggled with it, or someone that you know has struggled with it, a friend, a family member, and knowing that this has impacted just so many people, and the problem continues to get worse. And so we're going to spend this time together discussing this and hopefully maybe answering some questions that you have and some ideas that you have on this topic. And to do that is my good friend, Jon Noyes, is going to come on and join me. So Jon, there you are. Thanks for joining me to talk about this.
Hey, Ryan. Thanks for having me, man. It's an honor.
Yeah.
It's an honor to be here.
Yeah.
Well, I'm here and you're there, but we're still together.
Absolutely, yes. So Jon is a speaker, the outreach coordinator at Stand to Reason. I'm an affiliate of Stand to Reason, so we've been connected through there as well as connected through different areas and different ministry and opportunities, as well as Jon is a pastor at Soli Church. And so one thing I love about you, Jon, is that you not only are the apologist and came out of atheism, and we'll talk about that a little bit later, and now obviously a Christian, but you come at it also with such a pastoral response and a pastoral approach. And so I guess it's not a surprise that this is a topic that you have been kind of drawn to and that you've wanted to talk about, but you also come along with such a loving approach as just you. I'm in. I'll just brag on you. You genuinely, I think, care. You genuinely care about people, and I love seeing that. And I think it is so valuable, especially in the area of apologetics, which can be so intellectual. And so I really appreciate that. And so thanks for coming on. Now, I do know that you're joining me over Skype, and it has cut out just a couple times. So if it happens to cut out, hey, we all know internet is not the best right now. Everyone's probably at home streaming on Netflix, but we're going to make do with the best we can. So Jon, why is it, I guess we'll start with this. Why is it that the topic here of suicide is something that has been something that you've studied and that you have wanted to discuss?
Yeah, that's a really good question, and thank you so much for the introduction. It's super humbling to hear you say those things. You never
true.
really understand or know how other people perceive you, and to hear that I love people, that's really I do. I just love people. I love being around people. I love talking to people, getting to know them. I've loved pastoring, and now at Stand to Reason, I love being able to hopefully impart a little bit of wisdom and knowledge, to offer some training to some folks so that they can maybe wrestle with some of life's most important topics. The reason why I am doing suicide is actually, there's no specific reason. We were at Rethink Dallas. It's a student apologetics conference that Stand to Reason puts on every year. And somebody was set to present. The pastor of the church was set to present, but he couldn't because there was an emergency in the church. And we had to have somebody fill in. Now, it wasn't me, but what we did notice is that the room was packed. This is a year and a half ago. The room was absolutely packed for every session that they were teaching on it. So we thought, well, there has to be a need.
Yeah.
So get on, and I was the new guy on the block, so I was like, I'll do whatever, let me go. And then I started researching it and doing a lot of reading, and I was absolutely shocked at the amount of people that this issue affects. I have friends who committed suicide. My cousin Derek committed suicide. Prep of this talk that I give at these rethinks, I had one of my really good friends. He was one of the guys I lived with when I first moved to California 15 years ago. He committed suicide in June, leaving behind a beautiful wife and a gorgeous little boy. And suicide rates have climbed, and they're climbing exponentially, and it's up 30% in the last 20 years. There's twice as many suicides in the United States than there are murders every single year. And this number shocked me, Ryan. This is nuts. Suicide's the second leading cause of death for people ages 10 years old. I have a 9-year-old right behind that door.
Yeah.
That means some of her friends are starting to think about killing themselves, but it's the number two leading cause of death, number two cause of death for ages 10 to 34. And it's number 4 of those aged 35 to 54. I mean, it's rampant. Last week, two students committed suicide at the Naval Academy. And we hear about it. We're worried about this COVID-19, right? 21,000 deaths, I think, globally, is it's hard to keep count. Yeah, well, there's I have a figure right here. There's going to be over 200. There's going to be about 250,000 suicides, which is insane. So it's just it's an issue that's out there that we don't know about. In many ways, I kind of equate it to abortion. So abortion was this issue that nobody ever wanted to talk about for the longest time. It was kind of pushed to the dark recesses of our church, into the corners of our church body. And then once the cultural conversation started happening, once the church, I think, led the way in this, once we started bringing this conversation out of the shadows, we're able to address the issue and then ultimately able to save lives.
Yeah.
So it's been really rewarding. So that's my main impetus. The main reason why I'm kind of passionate about this topic is because I think suicide actually touches everybody. Your viewers right now, I'm willing to bet that almost every one of them has had somebody that they know, or somebody, a relative or a friend of a friend, commit suicide.
Yeah.
And that's just shocking to me.
Oh, absolutely. And one of my best friends growing up, I mean, from kindergarten, elementary school, in church with him, in school with him, families spent so much time together. Years ago, back when he was in high school, committed suicide. And I remember getting that news, and, we had kind of lost contact when we went to different high schools, but just in complete shock of, this is not something you necessarily hear about until it often hits you, until it happens. And, it surprises me that you talk about that, at Rethink, and I've spoken at Rethink before and had the privilege of being there. What you often find, and I don't know if this is a fault of the church or pastors, or I don't know what it is, but with apologetic issues or any issue whatsoever, sometimes I find myself speaking to students at some sort of student group, and so many students are drawn to a certain topic, and then the pastor goes, I had no idea. Like, I didn't know the students cared about this, right? I didn't know, it's when I'm at Hume Lake and I'm doing a Q&A in the afternoon, and kids are giving up 2 hours of their free time to come get questions answered about Christianity. And the pastor's like, wait, but there's like rock climbing and there's other stuff. Like, I didn't know this is something they actually wanted. And sometimes it seems like this is an issue that's not talked about. Now back to kind of the suicide, it's not an issue that's talked about. And then finally someone goes, I'm going to do a presentation on this, and the room is packed. And then you go, oh my goodness, maybe the church does need to be talking about this more than it actually is. I mean, is there a thought of why do you think that we're not talking about this maybe as much as we should?
Sure. I think there's a lot of reasons. I think for a long time, even now, not even just a long time, because we're not through it yet, but there's a certain shame that's attached to suicide. Mm-hmm. And the church has played a part in this, if we're being honest, right? Nobody wants to tell their friends at work or whatever that their husband, their wife, their brother, their sister, their kid committed suicide. For some reason, there's a weakness associated with it, I feel like. And it's like, it's something that the culture just doesn't want to talk about. There's a shame. And I'm not even really necessarily sure where that comes from. I mean, there's certain teachings and theological teachings certainly out there. Certain churches will tell you that if you commit suicide, you go to hell. So oftentimes, historically speaking, people, if you're a parent and you come home and your child has committed suicide in your home, you're not going to say anything that they committed. You're not going to tell anybody that, because you don't want anybody in the society to. You don't want people to be asking the question, "Oh, I wonder what his parents did wrong," or something like that. And it's in that's why I relate it to abortion, because it's this topic that is so prevalent. It affects almost on every single street in this country, on every single street in America. There are multiple people who have had abortions, and there are multiple people who have wrestled with suicide. And it's not only that, like if you start digging into the real literature and the research behind it, so many people ask these questions, like maybe I should just kill myself. I might be better off dead than alive. And not everybody believes that lie, but a lot of people start there. And I mean, I've never really wrestled with the thoughts of suicide, but certainly I've thought to myself, well, I wonder what the world would be like if I'd never been born. I wonder who would come to my funeral if I died. I mean, these are natural thoughts, I think, to be thinking in a fallen world.
Yeah.
So anyways, yeah. And then I got to say, like, when you say packed rooms, in Minnesota was the first time at Rethink I did this talk. And I'm sitting there, okay, I'm like nobody, you know. I do a breakout session at Rethink, and you've got Jay Warner Wallace, Greg Kokel, Alan Schliemann, you, Sean McDowell, right? And then you can choose between the topics that they're all going to talk about, and it's all in their area of specialty. And then you've got Jon Noyes, suicide, and who's going to come to see me speak? It's always envisioning 10 people to show up. I had about 200 seats, I'd say, in my room, and I walk in an hour before my first talk, and when I got there, the room was half full. By the time I started, kids were sitting in the aisles and standing along the back, students, to hear this. That's the first talk. The second time I gave this talk, and I'm not saying it has nothing to do with me. It has absolutely nothing to do with me and everything to do with the topic and where our culture is at. The second time I gave this talk, I walk in there in 40 minutes before the presentation. It's lunchtime for everybody. I was just going to go set my computer back up. The room was completely full. Students were eating their lunch in the room. When I started that second talk, I had students sitting all around me, around my podium. I couldn't move. There were 20 kids out in the hall listening in. And then the people the responses that I got, thank you so much for talking about this. I had a son who killed himself last year, and I've been looking for this hope. I had one girl at the Evangelical Philosophical Society meeting where I delivered this talk come up to me after, and she's in tears, and she's just thanking me. She said, I want to let you know that for the first time in over a year, I'm at peace. And I asked her why, and she said, because my aunt, who was schizophrenic, committed suicide a year and a half ago, and my pastor told me and my mom that she's in hell. And I was just like, man, like that breaks my heart. And then, like, we started out, I have a heart for people, and when people are wrestling with this stuff, I had a girl in Minnesota come up to me after the talk and say thank you for the talk. And again, nothing to do with me. I'm not tooting my own horn here, Ryan. But she says, thank you so much. I said, why? She said, well, I was going to kill myself tomorrow. That's what she said to me. I'm going to kill myself tomorrow. I'm clinically depressed. I have enough meds because I haven't been taking them. I've been hiding them. She was hoarding her pills. I can take these, and I know I'll die. My parents are going to be at church. I knew when I was going to do it, how I was going to do it, where I was going to do it. But she says, but you in this talk here, I realize that God's not done with me. I need to press on through this dark spell, and there's better days for me.
Wow.
And right there is like, oh my gosh.
Yeah.
It's unbelievable. So it's an issue that everybody's wrestling with. It touches everybody.
Yeah, and I mean, and that's just so good because it points to just the hope that we have as believers, the hope that Jesus Christ offers. That when you bring truth into a situation, right? There are so many cultural lies, there's so many deceptions that are out there trying to trick us, and we fall for them, and it presents this hopelessness. And man, when you truly bring the truth of Jesus Christ into it, and what he has to offer and the purpose that our lives have, I think that is one of the greatest things that can be given to individuals who are struggling.
Yeah. And it's okay. It's okay as a Christian. Like, it should be said that it's okay as a Christian to be struggling with depression. It's okay with Christian to be struggling with thoughts of suicide. And I should add the caveat that 52% of people who die by suicide, according to some statistics, most statistics, this is diagnosed with a mental illness or disorder.
Sorry,
so
you broke up
no
there.
Depression,
you broke up there really quick. What were you saying? 52% of what?
52% of people who die by suicide are not previously diagnosed with a mental illness or disorder. So the majority of people who commit suicide are not, according to how we would define people who are mentally ill, they have no diagnoses. Yeah. So oftentimes I feel like, and this is probably why I think we shy away from this topic, is we think that people who commit themselves, those are those crazies. Yeah. Those are those crazy people out there. And I'm not one of those. Though what was wrong with that person? Well, they believed a lie that they were better off dead than alive. Christians wrestle with it just like non-Christians. And we need to admit that. And then we can move forward. So now we know the why it's important to understand this.
Yeah. And it's, I think it, and I haven't researched this obviously as much as you have. And so maybe you can correct me if my thought process on this is wrong. But, what I often challenge students with is that students are in a very connected, right, generation. And I just talked to Kevin Yee about this a couple, when I interviewed last week, 2 interviews ago, but I think it was last week, where we talked about how to really come around students who are going through disappointment because of canceled events during coronavirus. But one thing that we talked about is this idea that like we live in a lonely generation, right? And there's been books written on this about how we are alone together, that we're together, but physically together, not anymore, but we used to be physically together, but we really are alone. And students are maybe under the impression that they have more friends than they've ever had because everyone's following them on social media, and they are more connected than they have ever been. And they're more entertained than ever before because of their video games and constant movies and everything. But I think what they're not recognizing is like, if we really are more entertained, more connected, more relational, more all of these things, why is the younger generation here, the second leading cause of suicide, as you mentioned, from 10 to 34-year-olds is second leading cause of death is suicide. We're killing ourselves more, and we are more lonely than ever before.
Yeah.
Why is it that it seems like maybe
it's an illusion, right?
Yeah, we're not doing as well as we think we are when we truly look at what's happening with people and the issues and the struggles that people are going through. When we think that, no, everything's good. I'm entertained. I have my video games. I have these things. And so do you see kind of that connection
it's an illusion on, absolutely. It's an illusion in 2 ways, right? It's the illusion that you actually are connected.
Yeah.
The human was created for relationships. I mean, we see that in the very earliest chapters of Genesis. It wasn't good for man to be alone.
Yeah.
So God made Eve, right? He gave him a partner, and we need people around us. It's also an illusion in what you see online. I don't know about you guys, but I'm not like, you guys see this 5-foot span of my house. If I brought this webcam out into my house, you guys would see the mess that is the Noyes household. I've got 4 little girls. I've got webkins everywhere. I've got bins stacked up, because we're in quarantine.
Yeah, they haven't been out of the house in 2 weeks.
Yeah, but my life's a mess.
Yeah.
But we don't show that stuff online. So when you have, you've got 2,500 friends, 25,000 friends, however many friends you have online, you're only seeing the part of their life that they want you to see. And sure, sometimes people post authentic stuff, but the majority of the time it's the selfie with the perfect makeup, in the perfect swimsuit, with the perfect beach behind you, and nobody lives that life.
Yeah.
Nobody. So you get two different illusions there. Well, one is that you're connected, and the other is that you have a perfect life. And then you put on top of this the search for meaning and purpose, and it's nowhere to be found. It's lost, because ultimately what we do is we believe a lie of secularism in the end, is my opinion. That's jumping topics.
Yeah.
But I think that these things help us do that. They help us into materialism.
Yeah.
Because we're looking at the appearance of stuff.
Yeah. And, and I've also heard people talk about how the more time you spend on social media often leads to higher levels of depression, right? Because you are seeing what everyone else has, and you're seeing the best of everyone else, and thinking, and, even though it's not true, thinking, oh my goodness, look at what they have. I don't have anything that compares. And that leads to difficult issues. So then when you're kind of addressing,
and put that on top, and just real fast, just put that on top of, hold on one second. Okay. Put that on top of already, I guess, put it in the teenage realm, who you deal with, right? You're a high school teacher. These kids are hypersensitive and critical. So already self-conscious.
Yeah.
And then, I mean, it's just a mess.
I couldn't,
sorry, you were going to say.
Well, no. And I say, like, man, I can't imagine going through high school again now with the technology and the things that we have. Like, oh my goodness, I had it easy. And my high school for me was just over 10 years ago. Actually now, 15 almost. Yeah, 15. But I'm not that old, but
it goes so fast.
I know it is so weird. I felt like, when you're in high school, you're like, at my 10-year reunion, I'm going to be so old. And now I'm like, dude, I don't have things figured out.
No.
But, you know, I look at what my students have to deal with, and I'm like, my goodness, I think it's so much harder being a high school student today, because not only did we have kind of that desire for approval and recognition and that kind of stuff when I was in high school, but now there's so many different areas in which you have to get it and ways in which you have to get it. And you have to constantly be doing things, and that's just so difficult. And
Yeah,
so,
it is. It is.
yeah, and so I think it's just important in jumping into this of like, this is an issue that, look, there should be no shame because of it. Like, with a biblical understanding, we recognize that we are fallen, sinful human beings that have thoughts and desires that are not good, that the devil is tempting us, that the devil is trying to attack us and destroy us. And so when someone goes through this, you know, the comment came in of sometimes we want to put the blame somewhere. Oh, there's a reason why they committed suicide. Let's blame the parents. Let's blame this. And so we try to cover it up. Let's not talk about it, rather than recognizing, look, I'm broken. I'm sinful. I have issues. And I need people to help me with my issues. We have to talk about these things, and we can't hide in that. And I think that's just such an important point. Now, you've also kind of mentioned, you mentioned in your talk kind of biblical characters, and maybe kind of talking about this of, you know, in Scripture does not separate itself from dealing with issues, especially even issues of suicide. So are there any kind of that you want to mention of how the Bible actually points to this, and we can take hope in seeing examples of what people have gone through?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, oftentimes when I'm asked, like, are there any biblical examples of suicide? There's 6 in the Old Testament, 1 in the New. Everybody knows the New. It's Judas. He committed suicide after he betrayed his master, his friend, his rabbi, Jesus. Right? He sold out. And he experienced a great regret because of that. And that regret led to despair, which led to hopelessness. And he ended up hanging himself. Now, the tragedy of that story isn't even that he hung himself. It's just the fact that I think that if he went to Jesus and asked for his forgiveness, Jesus would have forgiven him on the spot. Yeah. And that just, oh man, I can't even imagine that. But so you had Jesus, you've got Saul's an example, right? Even though he ordered his own killing, it's still considered the suicide. And then his armor bearer who killed him. There's a couple others in there who killed themselves. But the amazing thing is that there's great examples of people in the Old and the New Testament, these saints of God, who got to that place of despair. They got to that place of hopelessness. They got to that place where they would think that thought, I wish I was dead, or believe that lie, that they'd be better off dead than they were alive. Solomon is a great example of this. He's the one that vanity of vanities, all is vanity, is how he starts Ecclesiastes. Nothing has a purpose. In Ecclesiastes 2:17, he says, I hated life, for the work which had been done under the sun was grievous to me. Everything is futile, and striving after the wind is what he's saying. He's saying there's no purpose and meaning in my life. There's no purpose and meaning in what I'm doing. And everything I go after, it's like chasing the wind. I can't catch it. Yeah. He literally says, I hated life. And then think about who he is. I mean, this is a king, and he has all the money that he could possibly want. He has all the sex he could possibly want. He has all the power he could possibly want. He has everything that the world around him and the world. If I just had that bigger house, I'd be happy. If I just had that, that beautiful wife, I'd be happy. If I just had that, Tesla, I'd be happy. But that's just, and here's an example, a perfect biblical example of this. And he hated life, is what he said. Yeah. Elijah, the same thing. Elijah, oh my gosh. Elijah's like one of my favorite biblical characters, right? A prophet of God. He's there raining fire down from the sky, calling on God to rain fire down in the sky as a testimony to God's power against these false prophets. And he's crushing it. He's just doing such a great job. And that's the First Kings. And then you go to the next chapter, First Kings, like 19, I think it's 19. It says that he himself went a day's journey into the wilderness and came and sat down under a juniper tree. And then the scripture says this, and Elijah requested for himself he might die. So you got Elijah. I mean, you got Jonah, the same thing, wrestling against God. Yep. And then in the New Testament, because I don't want to belabor the point, but in the New Testament we have Paul. And Paul in 2 Corinthians, right there in the first chapter of 2 Corinthians, Paul says, For we do not want to be unaware, brethren, of our afflictions, which came to us in Asia, that we were burdened excessively beyond our strength, so that we despaired even for life. These are the saints of God wrestling with this, but the testimony here isn't that they gave up like Saul, that they didn't, like his armor bearer, like these other, like Judas. They didn't believe that lie. They pressed on through the pain, through the trial, tribulation. And that's why you have Paul, who says that, tribulation produces what? It produces endurance, and endurance produces, character, proven character, and proven character produces hope. These are but momentary light afflictions, producing us an eternal weight of glory far beyond all comparison.
Yeah.
So they pressed on through these things, because the Christian, we get weighted. Man, we created just like the non-Christian, right? And we have to struggle with this fallen and sinful world. I don't know about you, man, but my life didn't get easier when I became a Christian. Certain aspects became better. Walking in reality is always better than not. But my life is hard, man, especially right now.
Yeah.
But anyway, so these are great biblical characters where, when I started doing this reading and the research, I saw that, wait a second, oh my gosh, Paul wrestled with this? Really? This is Paul. This is like the dude who wrote the majority of the New Testament. And he started, there were times when he was depressed. He was like, you know what? I despair, even for my life is what he, testimony of all these guys' lives is that they pressed on through the pain, through the struggle, and through the anguish.
Yeah, and I think that's you mentioned there one of my favorite verses, and what I always quote when I'm talking about what has God allowed, evil, pain, and suffering. And I think, one of the emotional responses to kind of that emotional problem of evil, if you or someone has gone through suicide and struggling, I think the hope that we have in Jesus Christ, where then Paul was even able to say, these light and momentary afflictions are producing in us an eternal weight of glory, right? We look to the things that are not seen, but to the things that are unseen. Those are eternal. The things that are seen are transient, right? And when we truly recognize a biblical perspective of pain and suffering, that the suffering that we go through in this life is temporary. And now, talking about this as a light and momentary affliction does not mean, oh, it's no big deal, get over it.
Yeah.
No, it's not that. But it's when you compare, horrible, painful, deep anguish and suffering to an eternity in joy and happiness in the presence of God, right? As, our professor Clay Jones says, that will shrink your suffering down to insignificance. To where I think that's where Paul can truly say, this is a light and momentary affliction because it's producing in us an eternal weight of glory of what we have to look forward to. And I think this is kind of getting ahead to kind of the application of this, but I think it just flows so well, is that in my response often to this topic of suicide is, one, you mentioned, does suicide send you to hell? And I have a video I've done on that. That's actually one of the most viewed videos I've done. And my answer is no, I don't think suicide sends a person to hell. But even if it sends you to heaven, you shouldn't do it. One, from a Christian perspective, is that God has called you to a purpose. God has given you a purpose. God has called you to make a difference here in this life, and God has a purpose and a plan for us, and we are called to live out the plan that God has created us for. But also, from a non-Christian perspective, we often hear people say, well, they're in a better place. And if Christianity is true, and the person is not a believer, they're not in a better place. They have traded temporary suffering for eternal suffering, for eternal torment, for eternal separation from God. Right? The answer to going through difficulties is not to end your life and end this temporary difficulty. It is to find hope in Jesus Christ so that we can actually have true eternal happiness. And that's what, I think, is such a powerful hope that we have, is that, look, the suffering I go through now is temporary. It will be over. I press on through it. I will have eternal hope in the presence of God. But for those who are not believers, the answer still is not suicide, because you are not going to a better place. You're going to a much, 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 much worse place that is eternal, and it will never stop. To truly get suffering to stop, the answer is Jesus.
And that's honestly, Ryan, that's where the true tragedy of this topic for me on a pastoral level comes in, because my heart does weep for the people who commit suicide as an escape. I mean, most people do. I mean, that's one of the major reasons why people commit suicide. And the only way that we know why people commit suicide is that they leave a note or something like this. And notes are largely unreliable. But they're always trying to escape something.
Yeah.
And it breaks my heart for the unbeliever who's trying to escape something, because they truly believe that they're going to be escaping something for a better thing. And no matter how hard your life is now, that it's just no better for you if you're not a believer in Jesus Christ, once you die. And that, like, I really do, man, that keeps me awake at night. And praying for these people who are lost and who are struggling with this and their identity, right? Because what we try to do is, when I was an atheist, I placed my identity in the things around me, and I had to, my version of pressing on was pull myself up by my own bootstraps.
Yeah.
If I failed, I pull myself up by my own bootstraps, and then I go at it again. Well, what happens when you fail again? Because we all fail again. Well, you pull yourself up by your own bootstraps, and it's a cycle. And it's exhausting, if I'm being honest with you.
Yeah,
it's exhausting. I think that if even if somebody's watching right now and they're not a believer, it's exhausting. And until we have to look to something outside of ourselves for that transcendent meaning, that transcendent purpose, relationships with other people, and most importantly, relationships with God. That's the only unchanging thing that you'll ever come across. Every other relationship's going to be broken by sin or death, ultimately. And so if you don't have a relationship that's sustaining you, that's based on the firm foundation of Jesus Christ, that everything else, he says, is just shifting sand.
Yeah.
And so anyways, that's a great point.
So when it comes to then responding to this, what are the things that you have found, and you've kind of talked about losing hope and these sort of things, but what are the things that you found that would cause someone to contemplate and consider suicide? And then how would you then respond, maybe first to the non-Christian? Maybe it's Christians watching, who knows who's watching, but, either you're not a Christian watching, or you have friends that maybe are not Christians. And hey, if you try to bring Jesus, maybe that's not, they're just going to reject it. I don't know. So how would you respond to the non-Christian?
Yeah. So, okay. Ultimately, I started that base, that where the people look to, if you're a materialist or a naturalist, right now, interchangeably. I know that there's subtle differences, and that's not important, I don't think, right now. But all you got to do is listen to the words of famous atheists and naturalists, materialists, to figure out why people might find themselves in moments of despair. William Provine, out of Cornell, he's now dead. He said, no gods, no life after death, no ultimate foundation of ethics, no ultimate meaning in life, no human free will are deeply connected to an evolutionary perspective. No life after death, no ultimate foundation for ethics, ultimately no meaning. And he says, at least he's honest. And then, of course, Dawkins, right? So we turn to Dawkins because he's prevalent out there. Everybody knows who Richard Dawkins is. And he says, in a universe of electrons and selfish genes, blind physical forces, and genetic replication, some people are going to get hurt, other people are going to get lucky, and you won't find any rhyme or reason in it, nor any justice. The universe that we observe is precisely the properties we should expect. If there's at bottom no design, no purpose, no evil, no good, nothing but pitiless indifference. So when you put on this and when you put on this worldview, and you actually try to live it out, it gets to some very dark places quickly. And I know this from experience. I tried really, really hard to live consistently within my atheism, within my naturalism. And I had these, what Greg Kokel, he says they're bumps in the reality. And I experienced these things where reality is the way things really are. The world is set up in a certain way. And when you live contrary to that way, you bump into it. And some of them hurt, especially in the realm of morality, especially in the realm of meaning, because I was trying to find ultimate meaning, and I'm looking to my job for that. I was successful by the world standards. I was working at a law firm as a paralegal, one of the best law firms in the world. Some majorly famous cases. I mean, I had arrived in my profession and what I wanted to do at that time. I was making good money. I had an awesome girlfriend. I was left empty, just like just like all the celebrities that we see. We see them all the time. These people. Deion Sanders is famous for quoting that when he won his first Super Bowl. Actually, I say that, and most people who are young don't even know who he is anymore. Deion Sanders was an incredible football player and baseball player. He played two sports. He won a Super Bowl with the Dallas Cowboys.
Yep.
And he ordered his dream car. And then he says that at that moment he had everything he wanted, and he had never felt more empty. Because these promises of materialism are just that. They're empty. Ultimately, materialism leads to I would argue, a naturalism, a materialistic view of the world. It's like more for me, more education, more power, more sex, more money.
Yeah.
But they're empty endeavors.
Yeah.
There's no ultimate purpose in them. So non-Christian, for the non-believer, for the atheist, there's no hope.
Yeah.
There's no transcendent hope. And I would say that it leads to nihilism, and it leads to you might as well just kill yourself. I don't usually share this in my talk, but I had a friend. I was with him in high school, and then I was out of high school as a young professional in Washington, D.C. And I got wind. One of my friends called me, and I remember the evening a friend had committed suicide. And I was an atheist then, and I remember the only emotion I had was anger, not sympathy, compassion, love, nothing like this. It was anger, and I said, "Oh, what a selfish guy." That was my response, but that response, anger and blame, were the only response I had available to me. And ultimately, as I was processing this stuff, I came to the conclusion, and I'm just being honest, as an atheist, I came to the conclusion, so he just left the world a little bit earlier than everybody else. That's it. No problem. Let's move on. And I was only being consistent,
Yeah.
Question. It was a really long answer.
No, you're good. No, and you mentioned Deion Sanders there, and I think it's interesting you bring him up. I idolized him as a young kid. Man, I wanted to play football like Deion. I mean, I would have the gloves, and I'd have the because he always had the Velcro was not Velcro, and it was hanging off. And I mean, I did everything like Deion. And I remember as a young kid. Now I don't remember what time this was, but I think it was around 1997 that the event happened. So I was about 9 or so. But he wrote a book, and the book title was Power, Money, and Sex. And then it was like, I just looked it up as you were talking about it, How Success Almost Ruined My Life. And
oh, really?
Yeah.
I didn't know he had that.
So,
that's funny.
Yeah, so I read the book, and I remember reading it and being shocked because you mentioned he went out and bought his dream car, still did not feel fulfilled. He drove his dream car off a cliff and tried to kill himself.
Oh, did he?
And he attempted suicide in 1997. And then he ends up saying that it was that attempted suicide that ended up leading him to the Lord. And really where he hit that rock bottom. And so I think it's interesting where you look at people again that have, and man, again, another one of the lies of the devil, one, as Claudia pointed out in the comments of, one of the biggest lies is the belief that we'll be in a better place. But I think one of the other lies of the devil is that when you finally get the dream job, the dream car, when you finally make that $1 million, you're going to be satisfied. You're going to be happy. You are going to be content, and life is going to be good. And yet we look around us, and there's example after example after example of people getting the dream life, people making the millions of dollars, and end up putting their life in a deeper hole than where they were before. And we need to learn from that.
Absolutely. Yeah, I mean, we have a litany of celebrities, David Carradine, Robin Williams, Anthony Bourdain, Kate Spade committed suicide a couple years ago. Kurt Cobain, he shot himself. Junior Seau, for a multiple of reasons, but he still killed himself. Dave Mirra, Avicii, Heath Ledger, Chris Cornell, and a guy I used to love, and really recently this Olympic gold medalist Kelly Catlin killed herself. Because they reach their goals and they realize that there's nothing there.
Yeah.
And the emptiness. And I want to be clear here. I'm not saying that the naturalist, the materialist, the atheist doesn't have meaning in their life. I'm not saying that they don't think that their life is meaningful. They most certainly do. I most certainly thought my life was meaningful. What I'm saying is that their worldview can't shoulder that burden. They cannot bear the weight of an objective, transcendent meaning or purpose in their life. Not saying that they don't have it. We all have objective meaning in our life. We all do. To glorify God and enjoy Him forever. Yeah. And I should also clarify that just because you're a Christian doesn't mean you don't struggle with this stuff too, Absolutely. Which we kind of said a little earlier. Yeah. This is a Christian. This is a secular and Christian problem. It just is. Yeah. It's just where you look for your solution.
Yeah. So here's a question I'll throw your way that came in on the live chat from my dad, actually. I'll put it up here so you can see it. So if you mentioned before, many people who commit suicide aren't diagnosed with depression or some sort of mental issue. How then do we recognize the tendencies of someone who maybe is going through something, and how we can come alongside them and love them well?
I absolutely love that question. I should say it. I'm going to say this phone number really clearly just because it has to be said at some time during this talk. It's the National Suicide Prevention Hotline.
And that's posted in the description below as well.
Oh, awesome. Yeah. So it's 1-800-273-8255. If you're wrestling with suicidal thoughts, you need to call that number. Plain and simple. Now, as far as the question goes, there's certain tendencies and behaviors that you can look at at your friends, family members, acquaintances. For example, if you're a student and you're a good student, you start missing a lot of school, your grades start failing, you start becoming sexually promiscuous, persistently bored. If you're just bored, somebody's just bored all the time. Now, I'm not saying each one of these is like, oh my, I have my oldest daughter. She's your typical oldest child. She's always bored. I'm never worried about her harming herself, but missing a lot of school, lack of interest in regularly interested activities. Right? If they were an athlete and all of a sudden they're not playing sports anymore, experiencing what they're expressing, and now it's what they're expressing as hopelessness, worthlessness, helplessness. If they become aggressive, or if there's serious rebellious behavior, if preoccupation with death or suicide, I mean, it's clearly the number one indicator is if somebody says, "Hey, I'm thinking about killing myself."
Yeah,
that means they're thinking about killing themselves. They have to take this stuff seriously.
And it seems like
every
a lot
single
of
time.
Yeah, and it seems like maybe a lot of times our first response when someone says that, you go, "Oh, no, you aren't," and we just play it off.
Yeah.
No, you're not actually going to do that. And it's like almost like it's a joke rather than being like, hold on, like, are you serious? And even if you're not, why did you say that? And like actually digging a little bit deeper than maybe just playing it off, because that's the easy thing to do. Oh, no, you're not. You're just joking.
Yeah, and it's also, I mean, if you have friends in your life who are writing you a letter that's saying goodbye, it's not something just like put in your memory drawer and save. You should be asking questions of that person. If the people are giving stuff away, if they have treasured items, watches, jewelry, or books or something like that, and they all of a sudden start giving stuff away, that means something's up. And the next step in this question is, okay, now I've recognized that I think for whatever reason my brother is going to commit suicide. What do you do? It's really simple. It's just really, really hard. You have to ask them, have you thought about suicide? Have suicidal thoughts come into your mind? Are you thinking about harming yourself? And there's been this stigma, this it's a myth that if you mention suicide, somehow you're going to make that person think of suicide for the first time. It's just not true. A good friend, family, and this is a topic that you're worried about, you would bring this up, and you'll be direct with it, and you'll just ask that hard question. Have you ever thought about suicide as an answer? And then from there, I guarantee your relationship might suffer for the moment, but it could save their life.
Yeah.
And your relationship will get repaired. I promise you, because I've done it and I've seen the results of it. I've seen people turn from this because all they need is that they need to know somebody cares. You got to be, wait, I can be honest with this person. I'm going to open up. And then next thing you know, you can get that person the help that they need.
Yeah.
So that's a really good question.
Yeah. And I mean, I bring this up and I think it applies to so many different issues, but I often focus on, if your friend is eating unhealthy food, we're often very quick to call out a friend of that's unhealthy. That's not good for you. Why are you eating that? That's going to make you fat or whatever it may be. But we're much more likely to check the health department rating of a restaurant. We're much more likely to check the Yelp reviews for a restaurant. Are much more likely to confront a friend eating unhealthy and doing those sort of things. But when they're doing something that actually is damaging to their spiritual life, to their soul, and then now to actually the thoughts of killing themselves, we dismiss it. And we're like, well, but if I say something, it might upset them. But yet we're very quick to say something when it's just them, eating some chips that they're not supposed to eat. And it's like, man, how much more should we care about the soul of the person rather than just the physical appearance, which we know is temporary, which we know is not as valuable. Now, Claudia then kind of, oh, sorry, go for it.
Oh, I just wanted to add the caveat too, guys. Prayer works. Be praying for these people. That if this is a very real, practical talk, something that's going on in your life right now, lift these people up in prayer.
Yeah.
Preach to them the God. I don't say preach, like don't bang them over the head with your Bible. It's not like, oh, believe. It's like preach them the gospel. Let them know who they are. Regardless of whether or not they believe in Jesus, people are made in the image of God. They are. They've been knit together in their mother's womb. They're of infinite value and worth because of that. And then that's where we can begin ministering to, like what you said, Ryan, I really love. You minister to their soul, to their heart. Even if they don't believe you, if you have friends who are struggling with depression or they've expressed suicidal thoughts, say, hey, would you mind if I pray with you right now? And would you mind if I pray with you, pray for you every single day? And just see what happens, because I guarantee you God works. I mean, he does. And so prayer works too. Yeah. And then there's a spiritual component to this, guys.
Yeah. So Claudia kind of writes in on that and says this, what about, someone who's contemplating suicide, but they're shutting you out. And so they're not giving you the opportunity to speak into their life. What do you do then?
Yeah, this happens all the time with students. Great question, Claudia. It's so good to hear from you. Claudia is amazing.
Yeah, she is.
You should have Claudia on this show.
I know.
She's incredible. I deal with this with students a lot because mainly because I'm giving this talk in front of high school young adults, and they'll still ask this. And it sounds like a bad answer, but you go to somebody who cares about them, that does have their ear, and you say, hey, and it's not gossip. It's not slander. It's not sinful. It's caring for this person and saying, going to their mom, their dad, their husband, their wife, their kids, and just saying, have you had this conversation with Joe, and has he expressed himself this way? Because he has with me, and I'm concerned. Yeah. And see how it's done out of a genuine concern. But yeah, so you find a way in there, and if they completely shut you out, they completely shut you out. But at least they've shut you out, as opposed to you pretending everything's just fine and dandy.
Yeah. And I think
it's too big of an issue not to do something.
Yeah, and I think that's kind of the point, even with evangelism or trying to talk to someone who's maybe a closed-minded, and doesn't want to hear the gospel. It's, hey, if they're pushing us out, we continue to pray for them, we continue to build that relationship, and so that hopefully we're there when they do want to talk. But if it's us saying, well, I don't want to talk to you, or us saying it's not important, or us dismissing it, I think that's where the issue is. It's kind of a different issue, but J. Warner Wallace often says, if students go off into college and stop believing in God because they don't think it's true or they haven't learned the thing, he goes, that's on me. But if they go off and they want to reject God and rebel against him because of their own sin, and it's not having to do with, that's on them. And that we can't always stop because people have their own desires and their own natures, but hopefully we continue to be the people that love them and come alongside them. So we've kind of mentioned this a few times and kind of getting into it. We talk about the non-Christian response, right? Of the worldview matters here, right? And that the Christian worldview provides an objective purpose and hope of what we are created for, that transcends our personal abilities, our personal goals, our personal things that often are good. Right? We should have goals and things that we desire to accomplish in this life, but it's not like when you accomplished it, your goal is over. That when you hit retirement, hope is over. When you failed at class, hope is over. And like you mentioned, I can't imagine living that life. And that's even happening right now with the coronavirus of seeing how do you get through this time without a trust in the sovereignty and goodness of God? Yeah. And I think a lot of people hear that and go, how crazy are you, Christian, that you think God is good and sovereign in this time? But it's like, man, when you see how easy businesses and countries can just crumble, and how we think I have it all together, but I can be knocked down to the ground like that from a small virus, I'm not in control. And if we are not trusting in a sovereign God who ultimately has things in control, man, that is that very hopeless place that hopefully we try to draw people to. But as you mentioned, Christians are not separated from this. And there are even two pastors here in the Southern California area have recently
Yeah.
committed suicide. Do you kind of want to talk about this a little bit as far as a Christian response?
Yeah, man, it's funny because it's the same response, it's the same solution for both for everybody, right? It's placing our meaning, our purpose, our lives ultimately in something other than ourselves, something higher than ourselves, um, and understanding who we are in front of God. You know, the way that, like I said, it's the same response for each people, for believer and non-believer alike. We need each other.
Yeah.
It's the same response for going through this thing, what we're doing right now, going through Corona. It's really interesting the social commentary that I'm seeing. I've talked to people and they're going out and like trying to go to the grocery store or whatnot, and their view of to be very outgoing and loved people are now saying people are gross. I don't want to go near them. And I'm just like, oh my gosh, really? Like this is so interesting how we've changed our perception. And the only thing that's going to get us through coronavirus, the only thing that's going to get us through a fallen and broken world are each other in relationships, and ultimately that relationship with God, like I said before. But it's like relying on one another. You know, Paul in 2 Corinthians, he says, I'd rather boast of my weakness so that the power of Christ may dwell in me. Therefore, I'm content with my weaknesses, is what Paul says. He's content with insults. He's content with distress, with persecutions, with difficulties for Christ's sake. For when I am weak, he says, for when I am weak, then I am strong. You know, and I think that we have to tell each other about our weaknesses, our struggles. We have to be vulnerable in that. And I know it's really hard to do, but that's where the promise of God, my grace is sufficient for you, is what he says. For the power is perfected in weakness, is the promise. That's where that comes alive. You know, I've noticed this in my own life as I become more mature, both in years, follower of Christ. I find that when I'm weak, when I put myself in a position of weakness and humility, that's when people actually view me as strong. And it's such an odd and an interesting thing. But for the Christian community, how do we deal with suicide? We got to affirm each other who we are in Christ. We got to ask the hard questions. You know, I've noticed it's the same thing for the non-Christian. I've noticed that you've been giving a lot of stuff away. Like I thought that you loved that book. You know, there's something going on. Are you thinking about hurting yourself? Has suicide ever come across your mind? That's how we move towards each other. You know, and then also one of the things that I see within the Christian community, and this is a whole nother topic of conversation, but it's rampant legalism.
Yeah.
You know, this idea that we have to live by a set of standards, that we have to you know, climb that ladder to God. We have to do X, Y, and Z to please God. And that's exhausting too. That's just like the materialist. That's just like the atheist, the naturalist, pulling ourselves up by our own bootstraps. Only this time, our ladder, like eventually our heel gets into our boots at least. And on Christianity, legalism, the ladder is infinitely tall because God is infinitely good and just and holy and righteous. So we try to climb the ladder to him by living by a set of standards and rules. We overlay these do's and don'ts on top of the gospel, and in the process we end up weighting ourselves or each other down. And we need to break. We need to come to the understanding that there is nothing that can separate us from the love of God in Christ Jesus our Lord. Nothing. There's nothing that can separate you from that love. And I'm not saying that's a license to sin. That's where this conversation goes, right? Paul addressed that. You know, should we sin so that God's grace may abound even more? And Paul says, may it never be. May it never be. We don't pursue licentiousness. We don't pursue sin. We pursue holiness and righteousness in God. But with the understanding that there's nothing that we can do to separate from God's love. Even in the dark times, God loves us.
Yeah.
And I'm called by God, Ryan. You are an image bearer, man. Like God loved you so much that he sent Jesus Christ to die on a cross for you. And that's true of every believer.
Yeah.
And when we start talking to each other like this, for the Christian, I'm addressing the Christian right now. When we start talking to each other like this is what it means to build each other up in Christ. You know, I have awful issues. You know, I'm told to love my wife as Christ loved the church, even as he gave himself up. Dude, I fail so hard.
Well, no, that's easy, right? That's like one of the easiest things that we have as husbands.
Every night I go to bed and I'm like, oh man, another day failed. Like another day failed, but it's undergirded by this rich love of God that I know who I am in him, and that his love for me is consistent. His love, God's love for his children, doesn't wax and wane. There's no curvature in it. It's consistent, and it always will be. And when he looks at me, he doesn't see me, being mean to my wife or yelling at my kids or thoughts in my head. He sees Christ's righteousness wrapped around me, and I can be confident in that. And then when I get this perspective on, I feel like I can face any challenge. And then you add to that the Christian community wrapping around you. If you're part of a local church, hopefully your church wraps around you in your times of struggle, but it takes an openness on your part as well. So now you got me excited to preach, dude. Let's do this.
Yeah, right. With about 5 minutes left, but hey, good thing there's not a strict time constraint except for on the radio, but that's okay. But one thing that reminds me of, or a couple things that came to mind as you discussed that, is one thing is when we're talking with Mormons, in Mormonism, they have, this impossible gospel.
I love Mormons.
I know that, and some of the training I do and going to Utah and having conversations with Mormons, and it's this impossible gospel where, Christ's grace is sufficient after all that you can do, right? I think that's in 2nd Nephi or 1st Nephi that it says that. And then it's like, well, how much could you have done? Well, you could have always done more and done better. And so there's this impossible aspect to the gospel within Mormonism. And when you help them see the true gospel, there's often this like weight that's lifted off of what you talked about of this legalism. The other beautiful thing, though, and you mentioned this, is, Paul anticipated that if you preach the true gospel, the response will be then I can go on sinning. And he immediately then responds saying, I know this objection is going to be the one that's going to come up. And so I'm just going to deal with this objection immediately, because if you preach the true gospel, this is what's going to happen. And so it's interesting. And what, we've even been talked about is, as we talk about with Mormons, is that when they say, well, what about this? You can go on sinning. It's like the fact that you raise that objection, I think shows that we are preaching the true gospel. If the gospel you preach does not come with the response, well, then can't I just keep sinning? Because that's just how amazing it is. And it's the grace that it's based on, and not the fact that you are working for what you've done. It's what you have achieved, but what Christ has done. That's how you know the true gospel is being preached, is that's often the question that comes up.
Yeah. No, what's funny, Ryan, is actually that's the question I get most on these talks, actually, is after I'm done speaking, there'll be a line of people wanting to talk. And most of the time, the debate, the discussion is had around that, because people will say, no, you have to live a good life. No, you have to do this. And it centers that's the thinking that leads to, if you commit suicide, you automatically go to hell.
Yeah. And I think that's the beauty.
Anyways.
Yeah, and that's the beauty too of 1 John 5, where it says, that we can know that we are saved, and by putting our faith. There's such a confidence that is beautiful in Christianity of what Jesus has done, not what we have done ourselves.
Yeah, amen, brother.
Yeah.
I'm awful by myself, man.
There's something else you said there at the end, and I knew I wanted to touch on it, and of course I'm blanking out on what exactly it was. But I mean, I just know that this is such an encouragement. I hope it is. It is to me, and I know that this is such important truth that needs to be spoken. And the way that we need to come alongside and love people and help them see what's going on, help them see the purpose that Christ has called them to.
Amen.
It is just so important. And then ultimately the glory that awaits us in heaven. It doesn't make our issues, our problems, our suffering dissolve. But my goodness, and you know this too, and we learned this from Clay Jones in his book on Why God Allows Evil, it puts things in a completely different perspective. Yeah. When you have an eternal perspective, when you start to view things in the way that God views them, it dramatically changes what we see us going through. And it's just so valuable to do. Well, as we kind of wrap up, are there any last thoughts?
And that helps us move towards each other. Yeah, I was just going to say that's what sometimes we need to sometimes we need to remember that for our brothers and sisters in
Yeah.
Christ, and help them understand that. There's a wonderful story. John Newton was a friend of William Cowper, and John Newton, everybody knows, he wrote Amazing Grace. William Cowper was his best friend, and he was a hymnist, and he wrote, just real quick, these words, just 2 minutes.
Yeah.
Encompassed with 1,000 dangers, weary, faint, trembling with 1,000 terrors, I in a fleshly tomb and buried above ground. This guy struggled with depression and suicidal thoughts. He went on to write, there is a fountain filled with blood drawn from Emmanuel's veins, and sinners plunge beneath their flood lose all their guilt and stains. He wrote, there is a fountain filled with blood because he had a relationship, not only with God, but when that relationship was a struggle for him, he had a relationship with John Newton, and John Newton could remind him of who he was in Christ.
Yeah.
So be there for each other,
Yeah.
friends. Just, you got to be there.
And that just reminded me of the thought that I had is that the last chapter I just covered with my high school students before now we're on spring break is the purpose and the role of the church. And that the church is that place that we have deep community where we are reconciled with one another, or reconciled in a relationship with God. We're reconciled in one another, where we can truly come around each other, independent of race and age and gender and all that kind of stuff, and truly come together, worshiping God together, being content with one another, right? And our textbook talks about how, that studies have been done that content people can raise your contentedness up 2%, but discontent people actually bring you down 4%, right? So this idea that upset, mad, discontent people have more of a effect on you than happy people do at bringing you back up. And how the church really is that place that we are not only reconciled to one another, we're in right relationship. We come together in that community in an act of worship and relationship to God that truly brings the joy of the Lord, where we are praising God for who he is and content with where we are at, that then we can build those deep relationships, that accountability to come alongside one another, love each other well, and then in that serving God together. Right. And the church being a place of service where we can truly live out what God has called us to do, called us how to live with the purpose and using our unique talents, gifts, and abilities to love each other and to love the community in which we are placed. And that's the purpose of the church. And that's the way in which the church and community and relationships and all of us can come along and truly, I think, help us all live in the way that God has called us to live. The problem, as we addressed at the beginning, is that we are often more alone and lonely and disconnected than we think we are. We live in this illusionness of connectedness and relationships. It's not actually there. And so when we go through these difficult issues, we don't have those people that actually know deep issues about us. Right? We have not built that trust where I have exposed the deep secrets of myself to people around me so they actually know what I'm going through. And we make people believe that everything is good on the surface, and they don't know. And they can't come alongside of us. And that takes a vulnerability that is so valuable. And that's a vulnerability that happens in the context of relationships and deep community, which is what the church is supposed to be.
That's right. Jesus said that they will know you are my disciples by how you love one another.
Yeah.
And I want to stress this, guys, like for the audience, people watching, for you, Ryan, for everybody, it's never too late to start building that vulnerability.
Yeah.
You can start today by reaching out to somebody. So if you're watching and you're struggling with this stuff, would you please just reach out to somebody? Yeah. Would you just please call your mom, your dad, your brother, your sister, your friend, your best friend? Call that person that you've been wanting to call and you haven't had the time. Because now you got time. I know you do. You're sitting on your living room floor, like figuring out what to do because we're in mandatory quarantine or whatever it is. And so like just do it because it's never too late. And life is so valuable and too important not to.
Yeah.
And there's people who love you. There are, no matter who you are, somebody else.
Yeah. Awesome. Well, Jon, thank you so much, man. I appreciate your wisdom and the compassion that you have, your love for people, and coming and discussing this difficult but absolutely critical topic.
Thank you, man.
Yeah, and you guys
have a great day.
Yeah, you guys can check it out here. So I actually have one more question for you before you go. But he's a speaker, outreach coordinator, Stand to Reason. You check that out at str.org, as I have up there, and then also pastor at Soli Church, which you just planted about a year or so ago, right?
9 months.
9 months. All right.
With 3 other pastors.
All right. So looking forward then to next week. Next week, I'm interviewing your colleague, your friend, Tim Barnett, on the topic of Jehovah's Witnesses. So maybe a quick little...
Oh, fantastic.
Should people watch Tim? Does he have anything good to say?
Tim's amazing, actually. I mean, that's a man. Well, he gets to follow me, so he'll look even better. But he's like Tim is one of the most down to earth, nicest guys. He's such a good husband, such a good dad. He's also a pastor. And I mean, as far as presenting and his knowledge on Jehovah's Witnesses, I think you might be able to get it out of him. I think he might start writing a book on it. So
Wow.
you got him on the right topic.
Yeah, absolutely.
So yeah, you got to tune in to Tim. Tim's amazing.
Yeah, and even Claudia commented in here in the things. I'll throw it up here really quick. Let's see. She said, watch Tim and Stacey Barnett's, it's his wife, their weekly podcast on marriage during quarantine. I've been seeing that they started posting things on marriage. In fact, they're even now posting, they posted their first date idea. So, hey, here's some date ideas to stay married well. Idea. Yeah, it was, I think, order takeout and then have a nice little date at the home. So let me, awesome. As we sign off, let me pull this up here really quick. Scotty's asking same time and date. It is a different, let's see. I thought it was next week. It is not my calendar. That's weird. It's on the website. Uh-oh. It's on the website. It's up. It'll be posted. I believe it was Thursday next week. I don't remember exactly the time, but stuff in my schedule. So just so everybody knows, stuff in my schedule is shifting around with my school schedule changing a lot with schools not being in session. And so sometimes earlier in the day is better for some of these interviews. And now that I don't teach until 3:30, it works out. So I will definitely be posting the time and date. So with that, let me put this up. There's Coffee House Questions, the website that you can go get more information, as well as subscribing. That is going to be an awesome place that you go. Subscribe here, and then also follow on social media. And so there'll be the thumbnail posted and the video posted soon with the date for that interview, as well as there'll be things on Facebook and on Instagram kind of promoting it. And so you can see the time and date there for sure. So sorry, I don't have that for some reason. It's not in my calendar, but it'll be there soon. So as Jon said, Tim's a smart guy. You're going to want to hear what he has to say. Even though Jehovah's Witnesses are not coming to our doors right now, this is a time where we can prepare ourselves and be ready for when they do start to show up again. So with that, I'm going to sign off, everybody. Again, I pray that this has been an impactful thing, filling us with hope in the gospel of Jesus Christ and what that has for us and the purpose that God has called us to, and that we can use this to help bless those around us who are struggling with this. So with that, I'm going to sign off. Have a wonderful rest of your week, a great weekend, and I'll see you guys next week with the next weekly live stream, as well as a few other questions of the day that get posted. See you guys later.